At 200 nautical miles offshore, an 80-foot fiberglass ghost cut silently across the Pacific, undetectable to radar, invisible to passing ships, and loaded with $150 million in cartel cocaine. But on this day, a US Coast Guard helicopter spots a single heat plume no computer is supposed to register. In the next 47 minutes, cartel ingenuity collides with American firepower. What exactly happened when stealth failed? And why are cartels willing to lose millions on these disposable vessels? 80 feet of fiberglass shaped in jungle workshops. This is the hull that slips past patrols and satellites alike. The design is all about subtraction. Stealth. Strip away anything that reflects, anything that catches the eye, or a radar beam. The hull sits so low in the water that only a 3-foot conning tower rises above the surface. From a distance, even in daylight, the vessel barely disturbs the horizon, the rest of its bulk hidden beneath the waves. Fiberglass is the material of choice, not for strength, but for its silence. Unlike steel, it is almost invisible to marine radar. The radar cross-section shrinks to a fraction of what a metal-hulled boat would return. Naval architects measure it at less than 1 square meter in some models, 10 times smaller than a fishing trawler of similar size. This is not an accident. Cartel builders know the science. Radar waves hit the hull, pass through or scatter, and vanish. The only hard shapes are the slim conning tower and the small exhaust pipes at the stern, both angled to deflect radar away from search aircraft and cutters. Inside the hull is a patchwork of hand-laid glass fiber and resin, sometimes with wood or foam cores for stiffness. Each vessel is built by craftsmen who never sign their work, but whose fingerprints show in every uneven seam and improvised bracket. The result is a structure strong enough to survive the open Pacific, but light enough to ride just above the waves. The hull's freeboard, the distance from waterline to deck, barely reaches a foot outside the conning tower. That means the ocean itself becomes camouflage, swallowing the vessel in every direction except straight above. The conning tower is a narrow capsule with small acrylic windows and a watertight hatch, the only part consistently exposed. 3 feet is just enough for a lookout and a periscope, but low enough to avoid most radar sweeps. The rest of the vessel is painted in muted grays and blues, blending with the sea and sky. Even the exhausts are routed close to the waterline and sometimes cooled by seawater in an attempt to hide their heat from above. Yet despite every effort, the engines create a thermal signature. Thermal is the weakness technology can exploit. No two hulls are identical. Some bear tool marks from machetes, others from power saws or improvised sanders. The fiberglass itself varies, sometimes thick and rough, sometimes thin and flexible. Each boat is a compromise between stealth, speed, and survival. The anonymous builders work with what they can smuggle into the jungle: resins, matting, paint, shipped in bulk, paid for in cash, and delivered under threat of violence. Yet the result is an engineering feat. Engineering. A vessel that can cross thousands of miles, carry 6 to 8 tons of cargo, and vanish from almost every sensor. For years, this design has kept the Narco Submarine one step ahead of the law, but every innovation leaves a trace, and every advantage comes with a hidden flaw. Cartel financiers do not gamble with small numbers. Every semi-submersible that slips from a jungle workshop into the Pacific represents a calculated investment. The build cost for a typical vessel hovers around $2 million, paid in cash and often laundered through legitimate front companies or shell transactions. That sum covers raw materials, clandestine labor, diesel engines, and bribes to keep the supply chain moving through hostile terrain. The risk is high, but the potential return dwarfs the outlay. Each finished hull is designed to carry between 6 and 8 tons of cocaine. That is enough to fill a small delivery truck, compressed into waterproof bales and stacked in every available inch of the hold. The economics are simple and ruthless. On the street, a single ton of pure cocaine can fetch up to $30 million in North America. A full load from one sub, 6 to 8 tons, translates to a haul worth between $180 million and $240 million. The numbers do not just justify the risk, they demand it. Even if 3 out of every 4 boats are lost to patrols, storms, or betrayal, the surviving vessel more than pays for the entire operation. Cartel accountants track these numbers as closely as any Wall Street firm. The initial $2 million investment is spread across multiple ventures. Each sub is a line item in a much larger portfolio, one that accepts regular losses as the price of doing business. The cost of the crew, typically 4 men, each promised around $10,000 for the crossing, is negligible compared to the value of the cargo. Crews are often recruited from impoverished coastal towns, their contracts sealed with threats and promises. If they make it, their reward can be life-changing. If they do not, there is always another team waiting in line. The logic driving these operations is not desperation, it is cold arithmetic. In the past year alone, US Coast Guard reports confirm at least 40 new semi-submersibles launched from Colombia's Pacific coast, with 27 intercepted before reaching land. For the cartels, losing a $2 million asset is a setback, not a disaster. The real disaster is letting a full load slip through the net. This equation, modest build cost, massive potential reward, explains why the Narco Submarine remains the weapon of choice for high-volume trafficking. It is a tool built for the margins, engineered for the narrowest sliver of advantage. As long as the math works, the boats will keep coming, each one carrying a fortune beneath the waves. At 13:42 hours, the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter swept through its assigned grid, holding steady at 500 feet above the Pacific. The crew had run this checklist 100 times. Altimeter set, forward-looking infrared system, powered and calibrated, sweep pattern locked into the flight computer. On the sensor display, the ocean stretched out as a cold, endless field, blues and grays, punctuated by the faintest hints of heat. Most days, the only blips were fishing trawlers or the occasional pod of dolphins. But this time, the co-pilot's eyes caught something that broke the pattern. 2 narrow streaks of white against the black water, spaced just a few feet apart, trailing away from a barely visible shape. The forward-looking infrared operator dialed in the gain, sharpening the contrast. The thermal camera, tuned to pick up even the smallest difference in temperature, revealed a pair of plumes, each one about 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding sea. The helicopter's forward-looking infrared was not fooled by camouflage paint or low radar profile. It hunted for heat, and diesel engines, no matter how well hidden, always left a mark. The twin exhausts vented just above the waterline, their warmth blooming outward, unmistakable on the monitor. The co-pilot called out the find, voice clipped and steady. The flight deck checklist shifted instantly from routine patrol to active interdiction. The pilot banked the Dolphin in a slow arc, holding the vessel in the sensor's field of view. On the screen, the target resolved into a long gray cylinder, 80 feet from bow to stern, with a 3-foot conning tower poking above the chop. The wake behind it was thin but persistent, a white thread unraveling across the blue-black surface. The vessel moved at a steady 7 knots, cutting through the water just enough to betray its presence to anyone watching from above with the right equipment. The crew logged the sighting, 13:42 hours, 200 nautical miles offshore. Grid reference entered into the mission log. The operator adjusted the forward-looking infrared zoom, toggling between wide and tight fields, confirming the signature. The twin hotspots at the stern matched the profile of a semi-submersible, narrow, symmetrical, and moving with purpose. The checklist continued, radio frequencies cleared, intercoms live, weapon systems on standby. The helicopter's sensors tracked every move, recording the vessel's speed, heading, and thermal output in real time. The pilot keyed the radio, issuing a standard hail in English and Spanish. Identification, order to stop, warning of Coast Guard authority, silence answered. The vessel held its line, engines still pulsing heat, crew invisible behind the hull. International law gave the Coast Guard the right to escalate if the vessel refused to comply. But for now, the protocol was patience and observation. Every second ticked down, tension building in the cockpit as the crew waited for a sign. any sign that the message had been received. On the forward-looking infrared screen, the two exhaust plumes never wavered. The sub's conning tower, just 3 feet above the water, offered no windows, no faces. The only evidence of life was the heat leaking from the engines, a secret the ocean could not keep. For all its stealth, the vessel was now exposed, caught in the crosshairs of a sensor designed to see what the human eye could not. The next move belonged to the Coast Guard, but the moment of discovery, the instant when technology outmatched ingenuity, was already logged and irreversible. At 13:49 hours, the order came. The Hytron gunner steadied his grip on the M2 Browning machine gun, eyes locked onto the flickering thermal image of the narco-sub's stern. The rules were clear: engines only, no shots at the crew. The exhaust ports, 2 circles, each just 2 feet across, were the only targets that mattered. He waited for the vessel to steady in the crosshairs, the helicopter's rotor wash buffeting the water below. Then, with a squeeze of the trigger, the first burst tore through the air. 20 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition thundered out in 2 tight 4-second bursts. The first volley struck the port exhaust, punching ragged holes through thin steel and fiberglass. Diesel vapor, already swirling in the cramped engine bay, found a spark. A flash of orange fire, then a billow of black smoke erupted from the stern. The engine's deep rumble faltered, coughing as superheated fragments ricocheted inside the compartment. The narco-sub lurched, its wake shrinking from a white line to a churning froth. The gunner's focus never wavered. Every round was logged. Every second counted. The second burst found the starboard exhaust, shattering the pipe and sending another gout of smoke into the sky. The vessel's speed bled away. 7 knots dropped to 4, then 2. The hull, once cutting a defiant path through open water, now wallowed dead in the water. The radio crackled with clipped confirmations. All shots accounted for. No rounds near the conning tower. The gunner's training, years of live fire drills, endless hours on the range had come down to these 8 seconds. Precision engagement, not destruction, saved lives on both sides. As the engine sputtered and died, the sub's silhouette drifted sideways, caught by the wind and current. Inside the hull, the crew felt the sudden loss of power. Diesel fumes thickened in the cramped quarters. One by one, they climbed the ladder to the conning tower, opening the hatch to the blinding daylight. 4 men appeared on deck, hands raised above their heads. No weapons, no resistance. They knew what surrender meant. A chance at survival, a long journey to a distant courtroom. The alternative was a second engagement, and no one wanted to test that outcome. The helicopter circled, holding position above the crippled vessel. The gunner kept his sights trained on the stern, watching for any sign of desperation or sabotage. But the fight had gone out of the sub. The Coast Guard's disabling fire had achieved its purpose. Engines neutralized, threat contained, crew alive. The next phase would belong to the boarding team, but the moment that mattered had already passed. 20 rounds, fired with surgical intent, had ended a $200 million run in less than a minute. On the mission log, the engagement was entered with precise detail. 13:49 hours, 20 rounds expended, both exhaust ports destroyed, vessel dead in the water. The gun cam footage, time-stamped and archived, would later be reviewed by commanders and prosecutors. For now, the ocean was quiet again, save for the distant sound of rotor blades and the slow drift of a defeated hull. The Coast Guard had seized the initiative, not with overwhelming force, but with the kind of precision that turns a high-speed chase into a controlled surrender. 90 minutes after the engines died, the Coast Guard cutter Bertholf reached the drifting sub. The boarding officer, clipboard in hand, led the team over the slick hull. Each step was logged, every action recorded. The 4 crew members were secured and separated on deck, their hands zip-tied, their eyes fixed on the ocean. In the cargo hold, the team counted and weighed the bales. 7.2 metric tons of cocaine, each package sealed and marked with coded symbols. The hull's street value was over $200 million. Chain of custody. Paperwork began immediately. Every kilogram was photographed, cataloged, and tagged. Serial numbers from the engines and navigation equipment were entered into evidence logs. The officer signed off on the initial inventory, confirming the seizure and the custody of both crew and cargo. The process was slow, deliberate, and by the book, every detail designed to hold up in court. Federal prosecutors moved quickly after the seizure. Within weeks, the 4 Colombian crew members were extradited to the United States, facing charges under maritime drug laws. In federal court, the men stood for sentencing. The record shows terms ranging from 8 to 14 years. Lengthy, but not life. Defense attorneys argued the crew were expendable, promised a payout, but carrying all the risk. The court weighed the evidence. 7 tons of cocaine, intercepted far from shore, with each defendant admitting guilt. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard logged the vessel for scuttling. The order specified a depth of 2,000 feet, deep enough to prevent cartel recovery or forensic salvage. NOAA officials in internal memos questioned the environmental impact, fuel, chemicals, and fiberglass left on the seafloor, but operational urgency carried the day. The wreck slipped beneath the waves, taking its secrets and its hazards into darkness. 8 helicopters and 64 aircrew cover a patrol zone stretching over 42 million square miles, an area larger than the continental United States, the Caribbean, and much of the Eastern Pacific combined. The Hytron program is engineered for reach, not just reaction. Since 2010, these teams have disabled more than 180 narco-subs at sea. Cartels accept that for every successful run, 3 or 4 vessels will be lost before reaching land. Each loss means $2 million gone in construction, $40,000 paid out to disposable crews, and up to $200 million in forfeited cocaine. Yet the math still favors the traffickers as long as just one sub makes it through. For the Coast Guard, the cost of disabling fire, less than $200 in ammunition, stops a shipment worth more than $200 million. Each engagement is a battle of attrition, measured not in lives or territory, but in the steady erosion of cartel profit margins. The struggle is relentless, and neither side expects a final victory. Every narco sub intercepted means hundreds of millions lost to cartels, but for every one stopped, more are built. Today, the Pacific remains a chessboard of stealth and risk, with human lives and billions at stake. As technology evolves on both sides, the real battle is endurance. In this war of attrition, vigilance is the only constant, and the next ghost on the water is already underway.